Every day, the world moves on as it always has. Cities wake up, work begins, and life feels familiar. But beneath that sense of normality, something is shifting. The climate is changing, and the systems we rely on, energy, food, water, cities, finance, are under pressure in ways we're only beginning to understand. These changes don't live in reports or projections, they are already shaping people, livelihoods, and communities. We created the Climate Leadership Podcast so these challenges don't remain abstract or distant, but are explored through the people working inside these systems, making real decisions with real consequences, often without clear answers. This is not a space for fear, blame, or perfection. It's a space for honest conversations about what leadership looks like in a changing world. If you're listening, you're already part of that leadership. Let's begin the conversation.
Welcome to another episode of the Climate Leadership Podcast. Today's conversation explores one of the most important but often overlooked frontiers in the global energy transition: floating offshore wind and tidal energy. While solar and conventional wind have dominated the energy conversations for more than a decade, attention is now shifting towards next generation technologies capable of delivering large scale, reliable, and low carbon power. Floating offshore wind and tidal energy are increasingly being viewed as strategic solutions for energy security, industrial competitiveness, and long term decarbonization. Countries with strong coastline and maritime resources, particularly the UK, are investing heavily in ocean based renewable technologies as they look to diversify energy systems and reduce dependence on imported fossil fuel. At the same time, major questions remain around cost, infrastructure, scalability, investment, and whether these technologies can compete commercially with more established renewable energy sources. Joining us today is Mr. Andrew Martin, a leader in food and drink innovation, agri-tech, circular economy strategy, and emerging renewable energy technologies, including floating offshore wind and tidal energy. Thank you, Andrew, for giving us your time today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
So let's get started. To begin, floating offshore wind and tidal energy are receiving growing attention globally. Why are these technologies becoming increasingly important in the next phase of energy transition?
It's a really good point, and I think at the moment the world is reaching out for new technologies and new areas of energy. We're trying to decarbonisation the world really, and those technologies give us a real opportunity to do that. And also, the resources off the coast is really untapped, so it's a new frontier really, and taking over from where traditionally we've used oil and gas. Well, we've got technologies in that. Why can't we use clean energy then offshore? And that's really why it's becoming of real interest, because strategically for the UK, but also globally, we have vast resources in the oceans that nobody's really thought about. And that's why I think today it's becoming much more popular and strategically important, which is a really important point, because I think strategically it's becoming the most important development of clean energy globally.
Okay. So, Andrew, before we move into other questions, may I request you to learn about your journey so far? Like, how long have you been working in this renewable energy space?
So it's an interesting question, because we've been looking at sustainability for quite a number of years, and when looking at sustainability, you've got to look at the global picture, and you've got to look at overall resources and everything else. So the journey, I guess, into floating offshore wind and tidal had started about 5 or 6 years ago, and really trying to understand what was the requirements and how could you untap and tap into that marketplace, if you like. And I think part of the journey of that, the journey of discovery really, has been that actually the resources in the UK are very much untapped. And so when you look at it, you go, it's a natural movement into that area. And therefore, I think strategically, I suspect it was about 3 years ago, we started taking a much more serious look at it, and it is a developing technology area. But I think strategically for the UK, the last 3 years has been a game changer, really.
Okay. So most people are familiar with solar panels and traditional offshore wind farms. How does floating offshore wind differ from the conventional offshore wind technology?
So if you take floating offshore wind if you take normal wind farms on the land, on the sea, they're all a fixed base. They're quite invasive. So if you look at them, you're putting things on a seabed, you're disrupting marine life. There's a whole range of issues in terms of actually how you use normal offshore wind. And also aesthetically, it's a bit difficult sometimes. People have issues about how it looks as well. Whereas within floating offshore wind, you have the ability then to really look at where wind generation comes from, and your actual impact on the environment is significantly less. And you can, through the floating devices, you can maneuver the wind to where it's required. So you don't have to have this fixed position. So if it, if the wind and we know weather patterns are changing constantly at the moment, new El Nino potentially this year, you can actually then almost unpack that floating platform or undersea platform and move it somewhere new. So then in terms of your cost base, it's a much better option than just having a fixed rig, which is basically sat there. And if the weather conditions change, which they are likely to do with climate change, what are you going to do? It's just sat in that one position and you can't move it.
Right. Okay. So the UK is often described as having enormous untapped marine energy potential. From your perspective, what strategic advantage does the UK have in floating offshore wind and tidal energy?
I think you're absolutely right. We do have massive untapped. So, we have, the wind side is undoubted. People, we know about the wind. But a lot of people don't understand about tidal and the currents around the UK. We have some of the fastest currents in the world and most consistent currents in terms of the tides as well. And within that, I think one of the key things is that it is completely untapped. So no one's really looked at it. And it's also about a safe environment for the UK because, you can deploy things around our coast which are very safe. And again, therefore, it's a safe, clean, secure energy supply, which strategically you can look to invest in because it will give you that longer term commercial return.
Okay. So tidal energy has existed conceptually for decades, yet large-scale deployment remains limited. What has prevented tidal energy from scaling commercially so far?
I think there's two reasons really. One is strategically, governments have not looked at it in a way of giving the right price points for the investment, because people thought, well, we've got nuclear, we've got oil, we've got normal offshore wind. That position is changing because people are recognizing now that strategically we need to invest in this technology. And I think the second point is that we are becoming better advanced in terms of understanding subsea. And that's where the new technology challenges are. And I think within that, there's been a lot more investment coming into the sector in terms of people recognizing that, yes, it's a hazardous and there's different environmental concerns. But, if you take, for example, a complete other subject area, which is space technology, you can take things that's being developed for space, for example, and put it under our seas. So again, it's about utilizing current technologies that are out there, perhaps in different sectors, and utilizing undersea. So I think there's been a shift in that, and also a shift commercially to people to go, actually, there is merit in this, and we need different types of technology. And I think what happened previously was people were, what's the best way to put it, not coming with new innovation, just sort of thinking, oh, actually, we can just plug this in and put this underwater. It doesn't quite work like that. And I think that's where some of the barriers were. But now we've got really new innovative companies coming forward with a whole range of different technologies that are becoming groundbreaking, that then open up the marketplace.
Right. Andrew, I was also thinking like solar for the major part gets the limelight from the media and people talk about it a lot. But I don't hear that kind of conversation in the tidal energy space, right?
Yeah, I think it's because it's like all energy. If you take the general public, they like what they can see. So they see solar farms, they can see it on the houses, they can understand that technology. When you're putting subsea in, it literally disappears underwater. So they're not seeing the technologies, if you like, being deployed. So there is definitely a piece to do on the commercial side for the UK public, really, to understand why you want to deploy subsea and what that actually looks like and how that technology works. And also, particularly in the UK, well, across globally, we've got changing weather patterns. And the one thing that is constant is the sea. The tidal systems are constant. And I think this is where we need to get the message across of, we're talking about constant energy source rather than something like solar, which is fine to a degree, but there are days when solar is very, very weak, isn't it? Whereas with the tide, it comes in and out every day. It doesn't change. So I think, again, that's a messaging piece that we need to get out.
Right. Okay. So one of the major criticisms of renewable energy in general is its intermittency. Could tidal energy and floating offshore wind help create a more stable and reliable renewable energy system?
I think the simple answer is yes. I mean, it's more complex than that. But I think once we've got some of the technology areas ironed out, because that's still a requirement at this moment in time, because of the way that you're using weather patterns and tidal patterns, that is constant energy. It's how you untap that. But once you've untapped it, it is a constant source. And I think that's what people have to understand and realize. And that it's certainly in terms of tidal, when you're deploying sort of large scale tidal energy platforms, they will be able to provide very significant energy requirements, directly into the grid. And they can run literally 24 hours a day because the tides are moving 24 hours a day. So you're not then reliant to a degree on wind and other things. So it does give you that consistency back into the grid.
Right. So, Andrew, I'm thinking, like we are talking about UK. Do you also see other tidal developments around the world? Have you come across any such other projects?
Yeah, there is. I mean, Canada's got quite large tidal aspirations. Ireland has as well, to a degree. I think where the UK is at the moment, we are very well placed to become global leaders in tidal technology. And again, I think then that's another avenue, if you like, in terms of commercial, in that if we can become those global leaders, we can then deploy that technology out into other countries. And I think as we're proving the technology works and proving the minimum impact on the environment, there'll be a lot of other countries that are reliant on heavy fuel energy, if you like. I think would be very interested in this type of technology. So it gives potentially the UK as a whole, potentially a major commercial advantage going forward as well.
Right. Yeah, makes sense. It can become the world leader and then help other countries adopt it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fits into the UK's industrial strategy, looking at how we develop our energy strategies And then that helps us then as a country in terms of exporting technologies and allowing the entrepreneurship side to really grow within the UK as well.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Okay, so building marine energy infrastructure requires a significant investment, ports, manufacturing capability, and supply chain development. Are the governments and industries moving quickly enough to support this transition?
Well, as ever, I suspect I'd say no, because you need investment. However, I think there is a real move at this moment in time in terms of that sort of investment, and there's an understanding, which I was at a meeting today discussing it around how do we get our supply chain in the UK to pivot into it. So, how do we get more access to SMEs? How can they link into that supply chain opportunity so that, yes, we've got some really interesting new technologies, but how can we get that benefit unleashed, if you like, and unlocked back into that SME supply chain? Because that's where the real economic benefits will come. And also, I think within that, another key player really definitely is the Crown Estate. They are really understanding how to unlock this area as well. So we're seeing much more significant investment coming from people like the Crown Estate.
Okay.
And that gives confidence then to private investors, that gives confidence to banks as well. And therefore then from that, you get larger scale investments coming in.
Right. Also, Andrew, are you in touch with universities in the UK which are either working on innovative research or coming up with solutions?
Yeah, we are. And I think, it's an interesting one. So I guess we're at the leading edge in terms of talking to the developers who will look to put forward concept ideas, and things of that nature. And what we're trying to do from that is link back across the whole of the UK then into whichever areas have got specialism, if you like. I mean, a live example from today actually was the discussing of how do you deploy sonar drones underwater to look at dolphin movements, for example, as against pieces of wood. Now, we don't have the technology to do that, but we'll be reaching out to different universities to talk to them about. So this is the issue. This is the challenge, if you like. So, again, what we're trying to do then is feed that knowledge of real-time challenges back into universities to go, this is where the problem is.
Yes.
So we need research in this area, because that's not going to be cracked overnight. That's a complex problem. But I think that's a real-time example of the type of issues that we're finding. And then we can become a conduit into the universities to say, actually, this is where the research really needs to happen.
Right.
Because then you can become world leaders in the university research side as well.
Right. Okay. So beyond decarbonisation, could these technology become major economic and industrial opportunities for coastal communities, particularly in regions like the Wales and Scotland?
Yeah, because part of what we're trying to do is, and again, I guess if I give a real life example, we were looking this morning at a landing platform that would sit on the bottom of the sea, basically, to do a whole range of different technologies, particularly around sonar. The key question from that was, so how do we get the skilled people in the local area to build that? How do we get that very much localized supply chain? Where is it going to be built? So again, what you're looking to do is you're looking to really maximize that local content in terms of whatever that looks like. And then ongoing from that, which I think is the bigger piece, which I think is really interesting, is how do you maintain it? How do you get local people maintaining it? What does that look like? What does that skill set look like, actually, in terms of that? And how do you get the real community buy-in? So one of the projects we're currently doing the main leader of the project is a community business. They're leading on the development within this tidal area, and that's really good because then all the profits and that go back into the local community. And I think that's the way that we've got to shape it. So you've got the technology firms coming in, but the longer term benefits of, in my mind, I think I'm looking, where some of the communities might be in 20 to 30 years time, that legacy piece then of leaving that technology, but leaving all the skill sets within that local area, which could be very high paying jobs, to be fair, in terms of some of the ongoing maintenance side, it is absolutely key. And it's at the forefront of our thoughts, really. How do we embed that into that local community?
Right. Okay. So as the global energy demand continues to rise, especially with AI, data centers, and electrification, do you believe ocean-based renewable energy can realistically become a mainstream energy source over the next 2 decades?
I think, well, the simple answer is yes. I do believe that. I think where we need to get clever is when we're looking at, say, if we take, for example, data centers, what we should be doing is thinking, okay, so where are we going to produce our energy from? So if it's off the coast of Wales or Scotland, wherever, so it's in this coastal community, that's where it's being developed. We should be then saying, okay, so where do we build our data centers?
Yeah.
Our data centers or high energy use centers, whatever that might be, I think should be almost co-located, because that's where you get the true power, if you like, coming through. So I think strategically there needs to be a thought process about, so when we're investing in AI, data centers and everything else, it's an interesting one, because you might say, well, there's a lot of work under, Cambridge, for example, we know doing a lot of work in these areas, but the actual physical location of something like a data center perhaps needs to be on the coast of Wales or the coast of Scotland, because that's where you've got the clean energy coming in, which then powers that, which then gives you, again, a different competitive advantage. The work on AI and that can carry on anywhere in the world, but actually the use of energy in that is absolutely key. And I guess I'd be pushing for a model where strategically, when people are looking at larger scale investments in terms of what is a high energy use, we should be really considering that energy use and where it's placed, and then how close can we get that facility to that energy, or how easy is it to power it at some point?
Right. I think that's a very valid point. We should, the demand should be closer to the source, and that also increases the efficiency of electricity.
Absolutely. And I think, again, then, you wouldn't have as many concerns by people in terms of the development of data centers and things of that nature, because you're going, well, actually, if we can power it through this sort of clean energy, this helps offset some of the, the data, the carbon and things of that nature that, these data centers produce. We know that. So if you can offset that, and again, potentially in the UK, give us a better competitive advantage, because it's not going to cost us as much to run, because we've got clean energy coming in and it's a different type of energy. I think, again, that sets the UK aside from perhaps globally where some other countries are.
Right. So my next question is about cost competitiveness. So many clean technologies face challenges around this cost competitiveness. What needs to happen for offshore floating wind and tidal energy to become commercially viable at scale?
So I think there's two points to that. The first is, clearly we've got to work on using advanced manufacturing techniques to lower cost. We've got pilot concepts, but then you need to really look at the whole supply chain and how do you do a proper cost reduction across that, and that will give you much more advantage in terms of that, and reduce the cost. And particularly when you think about exporting technologies and things of that nature, that's absolutely core to it. Secondly, which I think is just as an important point, is that the technologies that are being developed can be used in other industries and other sectors.
Mhm.
So what has to happen within the sector is we have to look carefully at what are the other commercial applications of that technology. And an example would be, again, looking at subsea data transfer, for example,
Mhm.
and if you can crack some of the subsea data issues, you could use that in space technology.
Mhm.
So there's a different commercial route to that. There are defense applications you could look at. So there are, again, different commercial models. So I think it's not just about the commercial model for floating offshore wind or tidal. I think it's how those technologies can then be spun out into other areas, because that way you give a better competitive advantage and you reduce the cost as well. So I think it's a mixture.
Right. So finally, Andrew, looking ahead, what does the future energy mix looks like to you? Will floating offshore wind and tidal energy become major pillars of global clean energy system, or will they remain niche technologies?
I think the challenge on that, and I think longer term they will become mainstream, and particularly because of our energy changes and energy usage. There's got to be a mix of energy. You can't deny that. But I think they
Mhm.
need to become, and they will become, a much stronger part of that mix.
Mhm.
And I think, I'm looking ahead, I guess, now and thinking, well, we know our commitment to nuclear in the UK. We've got our commitment to solar.
Mhm.
We're looking at a longer term commitment to floating offshore wind and tidal as that comes on stream. I think people will be surprised. My vision of the future is that I think tidal and floating offshore wind will become a higher proportion than some of the others. I think it potentially will outstrip solar,
Mhm.
and I think it will become potentially a replacement for nuclear longer term, because
Okay. Yeah.
I think that's what people are aiming for in terms of, how you classify what a clean technology is. But I
Mhm.
think there's a real opportunity to do that.
Right.
The timescale of that will be difficult, because it's about investment. But I think certainly for me, within 20 years, we should see a major change in the energy mix, and that tidal and floating offshore wind would be a major contributor then in the UK by that point.
Okay. Perfect. So thank you, Andrew, for a thoughtful and insightful conversation. This discussion highlights that the future of renewable energy extends far beyond solar panels and traditional wind farms. Floating offshore wind and tidal energy represents a new frontier in the global transition towards cleaner, more resilient, and more secure energy systems. With significant technological, financial, and infrastructure challenges remaining, these emerging sectors could play a major role in shaping industrial growth, energy security, and climate strategy in the decades ahead. As countries continue for searching for scalable, low carbon solution, ocean based renewable energy may become one of the defining technologies of the next generation. Thank you for joining us on the Climate Leadership Podcast. We will be back soon with more conversations. Until then, take care and have a nice day. Bye bye.